Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Oh. Oh dear. Am I all out of that? Don't say it. Say it ain't so. Bummer. Big bummer. Well, morning. All right. Well, I need to place an order for coffee pods today, come hell or high water. That's what it's gonna be. Huh. Don't want to get a different cup? Oh, man. The debate is on. I'm out of shots rather than coffee pods. This is a very curious moment in my life. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Becca. I need to order them today. Heck no, Shelly. There's no amount of coffee I could be out of that would make me do that. No, ma'am. I'd rather suffer. I'd rather suffer. Huh. Alright, well, we're gonna have to be really careful with this. Really careful. Catherine doesn't have any. First of all, Catherine doesn't drink caffeinated stuff because she is pregnant. And second of all, too much caffeine gives her extra anxiety when she is pregnant. And third of all, I make Catherine's coffee in the morning, so all of Catherine's decaf coffee pods live here. Hi, Kendra. But I don't want no stinking decaf coffee pods. I have coffee pods, I just didn't have an espresso shot, which is what fits in the slime cup, and I wanted to use the slime cup. We're just going to have to be really careful. I don't know. We'll see. It's filling up the whole dang cup. How am I going to fit the creamer in there? This is distressful. Distressful. No, it's great. It tastes great. It just doesn't fit in the... The rain is back. Yes, it is. Mindy and Steinerberg from the Drum Bookshelf. That's so cute. I don't think I'm going to be able to do a perfect pour this morning. That's my problem. Yeah, my Beetlejuice cup is in the wash, though. So I was like, do I use the Marie cup? She's pretty much the only one big enough. I could pour it into this cup, even though it's meant for cold drinks, so y'all could see the drink in it. Is it bigger? Yeah. I mean, it'd be kind of funny, even though you're not supposed to drink hot coffee out of a... You know, what do you call it? Cup. Hey, Liz. Oh, Liz, I have something to tell you later. I'll DM you when this is over. Should we do that? We saw Mean Girls yesterday. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Should I pour it into this cup even though it's meant for cold drinks? Would that be... Am I going to make a mess? Is this going to be awful? This is going to be awful, isn't it? We're going to do it. Oh man, that wasn't so bad. Oh, it wasn't awful. Oh, wow. Okay. That wasn't so bad. It didn't spill anything. I spilled nothing. No spills. No spills. Let's see if we can get a good pour, though. Let's see. All right, I mean, that's not a perfect pour, but I also put in the amount that I thought for the little cup, so. It foamed up a lot extra because I didn't use milk this time. I used just half and half in creamer because I was afraid of the size, so I got a lot more foam, which is great. I love foam. But it's pretty good. I mean, it came right to the top, like whatever you would call the fill line. Good morning, Addie. Look at that. Why did I struggle to read that? I need more caffeine. What did you struggle to read? Here we go. Coffee. It's a little hot to drink through a straw, but it's going to be what it's going to be. Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah, because my kitchen is a strawberry milk kitchen. So everything is strawberries and dinosaurs and milk. Strawberries and dinosaurs and milk. The cup is adorable, though. It is. And I also have my blankie because the rain returned. Little man homesick with me today. Seems fine, but did not want to go to preschool. That does happen. Apparently I took a picture before my screen name. I'm making homemade chai since I have time. Yes, homemade chai. Super weird for him to okay. But you know, sometimes you have to just listen to what they say. You'll be on time to work? That's amazing. What's going on with this like Farrah Fawcett hair? That's the first since you started? Haley, oh my gosh, you should be glad that you still have it. I'm not gonna lie to you. If I had an employee who was never on time to work, they wouldn't last a week with me. It's not a lie. I'm being real with you right now. Like, I know that different people have different skill sets and things like that, but like on-timeness is like the top for me. Like, I can't with that. I don't know how you're getting away with it. I'm being serious. Like, how are they okay with that? How can you be late every day? How are they okay with that? Like, doesn't that throw off their schedules? Yeah, Addie got a new what do you call it? Icon. Does your employer work from home? Even if I worked from home, I still wouldn't put up with it. She's so lax with it and became a habit. None of my other bosses have been. Yeah, I wouldn't be. Even from home, I would consider it like, I don't know, I would consider it a sign. You got to be careful. I know you're young, but you got to be careful. Yeah. I can't believe she's so lax with it. That's weird. She does work from home and in the basement. Yeah. That's something definitely worth working on, I gotta say. Definitely worth working on. Everyone has their own idiosyncrasies, but punctuality is for everybody. That is my personal opinion. I believe that it is important for everyone, regardless of their mental capacity, to work on being on time. Yeah. Okay, so we are reading The Circus Train, and we are on chapter 32. Number 1 gifter badge, and I don't even know you. Well, hello, good morning. It must be spring break, isn't it? Because we've got people that I... Exactly. Yeah, that's actually my personal opinion on it. I had a friend when I was in my early 20s who was never on time for anything, so we started to lie to him about the time that things were, and we would tell him that things were starting an hour and a half earlier than they were. Spring break many places, yeah. We started telling him things were happening an hour and a half earlier than they really were, and then one time he came on time and caught us, and he was mad at us for having come up with that lie. And we were like,
bruh, you're always late. Like, you know, yeah. And we were like, you can't be mad at us. We were trying to get around you. I would also lie to a friend. Yeah, yeah. It's your spring break, yeah. I lie to myself about what time stuff starts. That's different. That's totally different. But over the years, he and most of the people we were all friends with have drifted apart because we were just like, you know what? He obviously doesn't care about us or our time. Yeah. 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 So, Haley, I know you're not a rude person at all, and I don't think that in the slightest, but just because you're younger than some of us, I'm just imparting a little bit of. I used to lie to my mom. That's the one thing I got to say about my mom. My mom is always early. She is never late. My mom has never been late to anything, really, ever. Um, yeah, and make sure they're not docking your pay. That actually is something that I probably would do if I had an employee who was late all the time, but I would tell them, I would say, hey, just so you know, every time you're late, we're knocking down because I'm not paying you to drive here. You know what I mean? I'm late within a 7-minute window. Normally it's my chore every morning to go to Starbucks for her. Well, if you're going to Starbucks for her, then you're not late. That's different. So that's a clarification that you need to make when you're saying you're late, because that's really, really different. If you are doing something for her in the time that you're using between when you start and when you get there, that's not late, that's coming. But if she says you start at X time in our home, that's different, and you need to talk to her about the chore. If it's something that it's for your job, that's not late, that's a part of the job. Just because you're not in the house doesn't mean you're late. You're still working if you're getting something for her. Yeah, but if you're not hourly, that's a different situation. Sometimes I'm late to Starbucks and I blame the baristas or the days when they're behind us. Well, yeah, and then she probably, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure, you know, um, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you work in a different type of job, it's different. But like, I guess the reason, I mean, I've always felt strongly about timeliness, but when I ran the museum, we had so many employees who were late all the time. And I finally implemented a policy. I was like, 3 strikes and you're out, straight up, because I can't start the day without a full staff. And I can't have people wandering in 15 minutes late and then taking 15 minutes to change into their museum or their uniform and things like that. So I was just like, sorry, I'm not going to book you for any more shifts, you know? And they would get really mad, but I need this job, I need this money. Then show up on time. If you needed it that bad, you'd make the effort to come a little bit earlier, is what I would tell them every time. And they really thought I was the mean one for it. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm running a museum. I have to start and I have to open the doors, you know? And even just 15 minutes late means that the first group of people coming in to have a tour don't get the full experience because there's not someone to run the station, you know? And so I got really, really nasty about it when I worked there. And I would just tell them, sorry, I'm not booking you next week. You're on probation. 3 strikes, you're out. I would give them 3 chances to be on time. Okay. You know, because it ripples and it affects everyone else. And then all the other employees are angry because then they're picking up the mess for the people who didn't make it on time. And then they're getting paid the same amount. Yeah. Yeah. If we clock in 1 minute late, we're docked 15 minutes. We didn't do that. I would have liked to. I don't think it's legal in New York, but that's how mean I am. I'm the kind of mean that if you're 1 minute late, I want to dock you for the 15 minutes that you caused me stress. Yeah. I know that sounds harsh, but that's how my brain works. I'm like, you've now caused us to rework everything because you didn't show up on time. Like, you know, so it is aggressive, but think about it. We're running an 8,000 square foot place and there are 40 employees showing up at the same time. If somebody doesn't show up, it means that the other X amount of people, however many people are on time, have to do extra work, unpaid for that extra work, to make up for you showing up late. Think about those people. That's what I would always tell them. I'd make an announcement to the whole staff and I was like, forget me. You think I'm mean, whatever. Forget about me for a second. Think about your fellow coworkers and think about the people who have to now do extra work because you wanted to go do something else this morning. You know what I mean? And here's the other thing. I also gave everyone my phone number. I said, if you're stuck on the train because the train's late, if there's an issue with everything, like whatever, you can text me. But if you are 100% no call, no show, nada. Yeah, I sit in my car until this time too. Everyone should work at Disney to learn what it's like to have zero tolerance for lateness. I did work at Disney. That was my first job. That's probably why. Wait, but let's read because I have a meeting at 11. Okay, yeah, let's read. Yep. All right, chapter 32, November 1943, Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Alexander, Theo was here again. Alexander thought, keeping his eyes closed, trying to lie perfectly still. It was a game that he'd been playing for the last few weeks. He'd lost count of exactly how many days he'd been the one to make shift in one of the makeshift hospitals the Jewish nurses and physicians had set up after the guard had beaten him half senseless. He wasn't sure if he should be grateful or frustrated that he'd been allowed to stay so long. He knew the only reason Berger was keeping him there was so that he'd be back on his feet to perform for the Danish visit. He waited until he'd heard the chair scrape, followed by the low murmur of Theo and the nurse, and finally the soft creaking of the hospital doors opening and closing. Satisfied that Theo had left, Alexander chanced a peek, letting out a sigh of relief when he saw that he was alone again. He gingerly rolled onto his good arm and propped himself up to take a sip of water. He wasn't proud of how he was acting. Theo had saved his life twice, but he couldn't help feeling he was also responsible for them being stuck in this town as long as they had been. Hadn't Alexander warned him? Hadn't he told him many times that they should try to escape? And now, after the display they'd put on in front of Berger, the security around the two of them was even higher. If their chances of escaping before had been slim, now they were practically non-existent. Alexander glanced around. The hospital was peaceful sometimes and horrific others. He'd seen men, women, and children die, their bodies wheeled out on beds like they were nothing but worn-out household objects to be tossed out. And while he'd initially been grateful for the healthcare services, he now couldn't decide if it was better to be in here, where he was free from his backbreaking work duties, or worse, in there, he was alone with his thoughts and an abundance of time to think. And he'd learned over the last few weeks that thinking wasn't always a good thing. I told you to run when you had the chance, but you never listened. That's the problem with you. You've always been too weak, too sentimental. Alexander groaned, trying to block out the ghost of Jacques Robichaud from his mind and the thoughts of Like. Since the beating, she, like Theo, had visited every chance they got, despite the danger it put them in. And this act of devotion, coupled with the fact that he knew now that they would all die, and Theresienstadt opened the floodgates for something more to happen between them. Uh-oh. Time was compressed in a place like this, and it wasn't hard to succumb to her nurturing nature. He listened attentively as she told him stories and didn't complain when she tried to feed him. When his cuts had healed and he was feeling strong enough, one of the first things he did was pull her towards him and kiss her properly on the lips. He missed Lena terribly and would always love her, but what was the point anymore? Besides, it felt wonderful to make a choice for himself, to have a modicum of agency over how he wanted to live the remainder of his short life. He pulled the thin cotton sheet up over his neck, shivering. He'd been lucky to avoid the diseases circulating and didn't want to take any chances. He yawned, rubbing his eyes. He wanted to stay awake in case Like came, but he was feeling tired. Perhaps he would just close his eyes for a minute, he thought, his fatigue getting the better of him as he drifted off into a dream. Anya, get out of the way! No, he's a good boy. He's not like you. Alexander felt the heat of a burning rafter above him, making his eyes water, but he couldn't move. He was trapped. He's my son. Of course he's like me. He was cut from the same cloth and bred from the same bone. Now move. No, Alexander, run! A crash. A scream. The scent of burning wood. The heat of a hungry flame. No! Alexander yelled, reaching for his mother, tears falling from his eyes. He thought she looked peaceful even in death as hunched over her. And then a knife, a blow. It was all over. You want to be a coward? Then go. But I'll remember this. You can't outrun who you truly are. Alexander moved again, shaking his head. This couldn't be happening. He needed to wake up. She was gone. But her scent was almost real, her voice so close. He could see her smiling above him, touching his forehead the way she did when he was sick. Alexander, you must never forget how much I love you. No matter where I am, you can always find me. Look up. I am in the stars, watching over you always. You mustn't give up. I'm so tired. I can't do it anymore, he sobbed. Hold on just a bit longer. Don't listen to your father. You're bred from my bone, fed by my milk. I am you, and you are me. I knew it the minute you were born. No matter what anyone tells you, you can always be who you were meant to be. Alexander! He opened his eyes with a start to find the nurse on duty shaking him with a concerned look on her face. He looked down at the sheets and saw that they were soaked in sweat. Where is she? Where's my mother? She was here. He looked around, desperate to see her again. Are you sure he has to go? He's feverish. It will impact his ability to work and perform, the nurse said to the guard standing at the foot of Alexander's bed. My orders were for everyone who could walk to be discharged. Alexander squinted, a harsh German accent jolting his senses. He frowned and looked around. A number of guards were ordering around the nurses. Fine, the nurse beside Alexander said, exasperated. She began pulling back the sheets on his bed. You'll be all right with another week of rest. Don't put too much pressure on your foot, she said, leaning over to help him stand. What's going on? Alexander asked. We need beds for the residents. Alexander followed the guard out of the hospital, gingerly putting weight on his ankle at first and then beginning to lean on it more firmly. He gasped as the guard opened the doors to the outside world, inhaling the fresh, cold air like it was water. It wasn't until they'd crossed the main square that he realized how eerily quiet it was. Where is everyone? Census. Berger's orders. Alexander was about to ask why they needed a census when the guards stopped abruptly in front of the Hanover barracks. Stay out of trouble, he said, pushing Alexander forward so hard that he fell to the ground. Rubbing his knees and scowling as the guards stalked away, Alexander dragged himself up and limped up the stairs, collapsing in a dusty corner of his old room. He never thought he'd be so happy to see that filthy, tiny space again. He leaned his head against the wall, listening for voices, but he couldn't hear anything. He told himself he had to stay awake. He had to see Theo and make sure that he was safe. But his exhaustion overcame him. His eyelids grew heavy, and he eventually slipped in to a deep sleep. Alexander? Alexander blinked sheepishly and opened one eye. Theo's anxious face hovered above him. Next to him, Vasily clasped his hand excitedly. He's back, Vasily said. He's back. He's okay. The dancer continued racing out the hallway to tell the others. Alexander pushed himself up slowly and shook his head. Theo put his arm around him. Oh, bless you, Alexander. I was so worried. What time is it? Morning. We came back last night and you were fast asleep. Well, where were you? Theo shuddered. There was a head count. Berger ordered everyone outside to line up and wait until we'd all been accounted for. Eventually, people started collapsing from standing out in the cold. He shook his head. Many have already died from hypothermia. Something clicked in Alexander's brain. That was why they needed the beds. Is Like? She's fine, Theo reassured him. She was asking after you. He stood up and poked his head into the hallway when he was sure the coast was clear. Theo crouched back down next to Alexander. Alexander, I was wrong. I should have listened to you when you told me we couldn't trust them. It's okay. It's not like we would have been able to do anything about it. The reason that they had the head count was because of a group of men who tried to escape. And? Alexander asked, but didn't push any further when he saw the look on Theo's face. I don't know if I was too worried about Lena or what they would do to her, or if I was blind to my own faith in the Germans, but I've lost us a whole year. It's fine, Alexander said, resigning him to the fact that they would be stuck here forever. The two sat in silence for a moment, and then Theo cleared his throat. No, it's not. Alexander searched his face, and even in the dim light of the room, he could see Theo's familiar resolve and fearlessness coming back. What are you talking about? We're going to do what we do best. escape. Alexander stared at him, wondering if Teresa's dad had finally broken him. There's no way out. Even if we were going to try, do you know how hard it would be with the extra guards that they've added? The number of guards doesn't matter, Theo continued, smiling. Think about it. When's the least likely time that they'd expect us to make a run for it? During a performance, Alexander said, sitting up straighter. Exactly. All we need is some kind of distraction to make them think we're not going to try to escape. People can see what they're not looking for. Jacques Robichaud's words came back to Alexander. But this time he didn't try to drown them out. A show, he said, his excitement building. Theo grinned. To end all shows. A jaw-dropping spectacular, something that will have the guards so preoccupied that they won't have a minute to notice we're gone. Alexander nodded eagerly. He tried to think of what Horace would do if he were in the situation. Do you have any ideas? Theo's eyes sparkled. Oh, I've got just the thing. Oh, that gave me chills. Oh, this whole thing gave me chills. Think about it, you guys. If this were a show or a TV show or a movie or whatever, that moment when he says, we're going to do what we do best, escape, would be like the end scene. Like, lights go down. Oh my gosh, it would be like the moment when it goes to commercial break or the end of an episode. That gave me chills. We're going to do what we do best. Escape. Ooh, so good. I love Theo so much. I'm so glad we put Raul Esparza in that role because he might just win his Tony for this role. Oh, man. So good. So good. All right. Oh, this is interesting. Chapter 33 doesn't have a date or location. All the other chapters in part 2 have said, and even in some of the other ones, have said the year and where they are. This doesn't say it. What does that mean? Are we in limbo? Well, let's find out, I guess, huh? I don't know. Chapter 33. Yeah, maybe. I have no idea. Chapter 33. Taking a page from Horace's book, Theo decided to put a performance inspired by the Moulin Rouge. Oh, I think it's because it's in the same time and place. It's just a continuation of the previous page. That's why. We're still in Theresienstadt in 1943. Yes. Okay. This is just a continuation of the previous chapter. That's why. Okay. Theo decided to put on a performance inspired by the Moulin Rouge. His vision was admittedly much smaller, the costumes less sumptuous. She knows that I do this every morning. She knows, and she calls anyway. It was my mother. Catherine never calls. Catherine doesn't call. Millennials don't call. Any millennial in their right mind doesn't make a phone call. It didn't glitch on any of you. It was my mother. Everything is fine. We're back. Can everyone hear me again? Are we okay to start again? Mom called despite the fact that she knows that we do this every morning. She likes to call anyway because she is an agent of chaos. The woman is an agent of chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos. Oh, that was a moment. Put the phone on Do Not Disturb when you read. I would, except especially now that we're getting into the time when Catherine could potentially go into labor any day now. Like, she's officially at the part where he's viable and anything could happen. So I am always on high alert right now because we could have a baby any day now. She's due in 1 month, so even though a month is technically a long time, Zoe was born early, I was born early, anything could happen. Yeah, Baby Watch 2023. We are on Baby Watch officially now. Yeah. He's viable, so if he comes now, he comes now, and I live with Zoe for 2 days, or whatever it's going to be. Never mind, ignore me. No, I would never ignore you. You didn't think of it because it's not your responsibility to think of when my nephew is going to be born. My kiddo was born 3 weeks early. Exactly. So he could be born anytime now. We talked yesterday. Catherine's putting a car seat in my car next week so that if she does go into labor, we can just toss Zoe in my car and they go. We're taking the car seat out of her husband's car and putting it in my car. Yeah, it's the moment. All right, back to where we were. They just announced the leads for the London Brokeback Mountain. Oh yeah, who's going to be? Whereas the shows in Teresa's dad had, up till now, been a series of individual acts, this special presentation would bring everyone together and drive audiences wild in its symbolic delights. Mike Weiss and Lucas Hedge. They are amazing, but those don't really feel like right castings to that for me. I'm going to have to look and see if they've changed their physicality since the last time I saw them. Because that feels weird. Too skinny, no? We'll see. The timing couldn't have been more serendipitous. Theo used the upcoming Danish visit to pitch his idea, telling Berger that they needed to start now if they were going to convincingly masquerade as a model town in a few months' time. Berger was so pleased that he insisted on bankrolling the entire operation. Apart from starting on an aesthetic improvement for the town, Theo suggested that they conduct a full dress rehearsal just before Christmas. In order to iron out any hiccups, we want to ensure that everything is perfect for the actual visit, Theo explained to Berger, who readily agreed. Where there was never any money before, it magically appeared in the form of silk, taffeta bolts, spools of golden thread, and sparkling red sequins. It's pretty funny that they're in a Jewish ghetto right now, but Theo's still talking about Christmas, because remember, Theo's not Jewish. Theo's Greek. He celebrates Christmas, not Hanukkah. So he's like, what's up, bros? Like, he's not Jewish. He's just there because he got caught up in this mess. But he's like, it's Christmas time, friends. So, like, that's one of the things about this that everybody, like, and obviously this is not me saying that the Jews weren't the ones being persecuted here. The Jews, the LGBTQ community, people of color were absolutely the ones being persecuted here. But also anyone trying to help them was just like, we're here too. Hi. Hello. Also dying because you people are insane. Truthfully. Alexander was tasked with inspiring other performers to stretch their imaginations, but when he explained the concept, the inspiration flowed. Buoyed by the freedom to experiment, the residents band together, eager to produce a show of the highest order. Natalia took charge of choreographing the can-can number, complete with high kicks and jeweled black garter belts. She was given the roots of a rubia plant and spent an evening hunched over the steel washing basin, dyeing all of the dancers' point shoes into a deep red. Vasily teamed up with another man to perform a comedic act inspired by Petit de Chocolat. One woman took on the challenge of singing an Adelaide Hall song, and the courtyard was suddenly filled with different kinds of music, sultry, jazzy, sensuous. Like would be part of an orchestral group that played a Duke Ellington piece, but it was in the costuming department where she truly shone. After rehearsals, she sat for hours, her nimble fingers working by candlelight, stitching white and silver feathers onto corsets and adding golden trims to the hem of long, ruffled skirts and creating a set of glorious red velvet tails for Berger himself. Alexander had once heard Horace say that with constraint came beauty. The statement could not have been truer now. There was a real joy pulsating in the air. The grand finale featured Theo and Alexander being handcuffed together and then escaping from a tank full of water. What the others didn't know was that they were planning to swap places with the guards Eric and Frederick and then leave while the imposters were trying to escape. They're going to drown the idiot guards in the same moment. I live for it. Drown those idiot guards. I'm here for it. Send them to hell, as far as I'm concerned. To divert suspicion, they scheduled a trial run with Berger, working around the clock to finish building their equipment. Because everyone in the workshop knew about the illusion, they didn't have to hide that part. They built a solid wood frame and slotted extra thick panels into the place on all four sides of the tank. And then they created a simple pulley and harness system During the trick, a guard would use it to hoist them above the tank before dropping them into the water. With some of the plant dye left over from Natalia's costumes, they'd tint the water red on the night of the show and then project lanterns from behind it, giving it a majestic, rich glow. I hate the suspense, but this is a genius move when you think about it, right? It's absolutely maybe the only way that this would have been possible. An actual illusionist escaping. Because, I mean, some people escaped, but not many, right? Like, really not many. During their trial run, Berger placed potato sacks over their head, handcuffed them back to back, and secured the harness tightly around their waists. Once this was done, the guard attached a metal hook to one of the harness loops and hoisted the two illusionists up over the tank. On Berger's command, the curtains opened, revealing the magicians dangling dangerously in midair. Then the guard released the rope, plunging them into the water. A metallic covering was then slid over the top of the tank, locking them in. Most people could survive underwater for no more than 2 minutes, but Alexander and Theo, skilled at holding their breath, could survive at least 4. As they kicked and flailed, making it look like they were struggling to get out, Alexander felt a sharp tip of a key to the handcuffs that Theo had hidden up his sleeve. This was Alexander's cue to take the additional key that he'd hidden up his own sleeve, which was the one that would get them out of the tank. They built in a hidden lock on the inside of the cover, one that wasn't visible to the guards. With the murky red, no one would be able to see Alexander unlock it. They'd wait a few more seconds for dramatic effect and then swam up and burst through the top of the tank, catching their breath as they leaned over the side of the tank. Alexander climbed out and tried to shake out the water from his hair and clothes. It was only then that he heard the applause. "Magnificent! It's magnificent!" Berger stood in the front row, clapping his hands exuberantly. Alexander looked around. Everyone was on their feet. Wait, the fact that they got the camp to oversee it's absolutely insane. It's really funny that they were like, yeah, we'll make you guys look good. We'll make you look real good. Guards had abandoned their post to see them play with their lives. Their fellow performers were watching with a mixture of admiration and envy on their face, jealous that their own acts would never be as thrilling. No one could take their eyes off them. It was going to work. With the mechanics of the illusion worked out and preparation well underway, it was time to tell Like the truth. Oof. Uh-oh. 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 Theo and Alexander firmly agreed that they had to take her with them. Oh. They're trying to take her. I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Like, I'm not saying I want anyone to be left behind, but I don't think it's good to include outsiders in stuff like this. I never think that is a good idea. So they took her aside after rehearsal one day and explained their plan. It could ruin everything. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked, distraught. "Something could go wrong," Theo replied, "but truthfully, I don't think we're going to get out of here alive if we don't chance it." Like looked uncertain. "If I leave, what will I have?" It struck Alexander then that he and Theo were in very different positions than Like. Theo had a daughter to raise. Alexander didn't know what his future held, but at the very least he had a trade that he could practice. Like had no home or family. Though she was a formidable musician and seamstress, Alexander knew that by sheer virtue of her being female, she would struggle to get work. He shuddered when he thought about her ending up in a brothel. "Have you learned nothing from the last month? Don't waste your time looking out for anyone else." As he stared at her sad face, Alexander did something that he didn't have the courage to do until then. "You have me." Like's eyes flickered with doubt. Alexander took her hand in his. He didn't know how things were going to play out with Lena, but he had to take care of Like no matter what. "Wherever we go, I'll be there. I promise." For a moment, Alexander thought she was going to refuse again. So concerned was the look on her face. And then she collapsed into his arms, sobs of relief flowing out of her. "It's okay." He stroked her hair. "Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." With Like on board, they divided up the remaining tasks. Theo's next job was to procure a few bottles of brandy from Berger, and he played his part perfectly. During one of the rehearsals, he knew that Berger would be attending, and he threw down his cards, fell to his knees, grabbing his wrists. "Forgive me, sir," Theo said, grimacing. "It's the arthritis." He cast his eyes in Berger's direction. "It would be such a shame not to be able to perform for the Danes." Berger straightened up in his chair. That's not an option. The town must be ready. Theo nodded, continuing to massage his wrists. Could I trouble you for 2 bottles of brandy? That usually cures it. Nothing too expensive, of course. Berger did the rest. See it to this man to get what he needs before the end of the day, he shouted to one of the guards, who nodded. Alexander smiled from his corner as Theo thanked Berger repeatedly for his generosity. Like proved to be a worthy partner in their plan. Between her skills as a seamstress and the trustworthy relationship she built with the town staff, she quickly became the most valuable member of their team. Within a week, she'd created costumes for Theo and Alexander and an identical set for Eric and Frederick. She also got some barbiturial. I thought it was going to say barbiturates, but it says barbituril. Barbituril, a potent sleeping pill from the hospital. She'd memorized the nursing schedule and was able to procure a handful of pills. She surreptitiously handed them to Alexander during a break. And in rehearsals, he quickly wrapped them in a handkerchief and stowed them in his boot. Likei's final task was to obtain the official train timetable. The administration office held folders with the information of all the local train transportation schedules. Because Likei had excellent penmanship, she was often called upon to transcribe records. When Frau Lauder stepped out to use the toilet one afternoon, Likei pounced on the correct file and quickly copied down the departure times of a supply train scheduled to leave Bolshevik for Prague on the 19th of December. 19th of December? Isn't that too early? I thought that they were going to do their trial run just before Christmas. Isn't the 19th way too early? I've got it, she said in a low voice at rehearsal that evening, pointing in her pocket. There's one just before 9:30 on the evening of the 19th. It's perfect. Overjoyed with everything that was coming together, Alexander swept her up in his arms. This is it, Likei, he said, twirling her around. This is our freedom train. Maybe including her wasn't so bad. I don't know. I feel like trying to get 3 people out is harder than trying to get 2 people out. But we'll see. We'll see. Chapter 34. Snow fell like a dusting of sugar as they drew closer to the show date. The day before the big performance, Alexander whistled as he walked to the canteen. Though the familiar chill of winter had settled in the air, nothing could harden his mood. At the canteen, Alexander spotted Likei hunched over in a corner. He grinned and carried his tray over to her. Good morning! Startled, Likei twisted around. Alexander's smile faded as his eyes moved from her frigid, frightened face to the handkerchief dotted with faint red spots. She shoved it in her pocket and stood up, coughing. I didn't see you. She smiled a little too eagerly and reached for his hands. He pulled away. How long? Her smile flickered. She opened her mouth to answer, but a violent cough escaped and she bent over the table. Alexander ran his hand over her back, flinching when he felt her ribs pushing against the skin. He'd been so busy planning their escape that he'd stopped paying attention to what was happening inside these walls. A drop of blood fell on her handkerchief. When she finished coughing, she reached out to him, but he stepped back. I asked you how long. Likei winced, refusing to meet his eyes, and instead looked at the group of children scampering by. When she spoke, her voice was soft and free of bitterness. 6 or 7 weeks? Alexander swore under his breath. He'd let his guard down by letting her in, and now he was on the cusp of losing her too. Well, he wasn't going to let that happen so easily. Grabbing her arm, Alexander jerked her out of the canteen. She whimpered as he pulled her towards the hospital. Stop it, Alexander, stop it! Her feeble pleas escalated to a shriek as he let go, watching her arm fall limply back down. Did you see a nurse? She massaged her wrist and shook her head. He punched the wall in front of him in frustration and anger. Likei began crying, which only made him angrier. Why are you crying? You knew, and you didn't say anything. I didn't want to worry you, she said quietly. Didn't you think I should know? Do you not care, coming and sitting next to me every day, what would happen? And what was your plan for when we get out? Was I supposed to... Alexander stopped himself from saying the thing that they were both afraid of, the thing that she'd probably accepted but didn't want to discuss. Did you ever stop to think about that? I've only wanted to help, Like whispered. She slid to the ground and pulled her legs close to her chest, her calloused hands clutching at her kneecaps. Alexander noticed the cracking on her knuckles where her skin had become chapped from the cold. She shook with sobs, mumbling her apologies over and over again while he stood over her, lost. To his right, the archway to the courtyard framed the gravel-lined ground, the shades of beige and gray and stark white. Exhausted, Alexander sank down, pulling Like towards him. Her body stiff at first, eventually relaxed, and she cried into his shirt. He thought about Vienna and the medical facilities there. He wanted to ask her so many questions. Did she know any doctors who would help with tuberculosis? Why hadn't she told him? Didn't she trust him? I could have helped you, he wanted to say, but nothing would come out of his mouth. Instead, they sat in mourning silence, two orphans who dared to dream only to have fate deal them another wicked blow. Perhaps if they hadn't been so distraught, they'd have noticed Attila lurking in the shadows. See? That's what I'm telling you. You've got to be careful. Alexander's mood the rest of the day was constantly changing. One minute he was relieved Like was alive. The next he worried about how he was going to look after her. And then he started fretting about his own health and wondering if he'd gotten sick. He skipped dinner and instead went to lie down in his room. Closing his eyes, he began to go over the events for tomorrow in his head. The mechanics of pulling off the illusion and how much time they'd have to get to the station. He thought of Eric and Frederick and how thrilled he'd been just a few hours earlier at the prospect of never having to see their faces again. He sat up, rubbed his head, and Theo had stashed the brandy bottles in the box in the corner. He took one out and uncorked it. Tipping it back, he took a long sip. It burned as it trickled down his throat. After he'd had enough to satiate himself, but not so much that he'd look suspicious, he wiped his mouth and put the bottle away. Feeling sluggish, he slumped back to bed, allowing the sweet, comforting cloak of the alcohol to lull him into deep sleep. Alexander opened his eyes to find Theo shaking him. A dull pain stabbed at the front of his head. What time is it? Late. You missed dinner, Theo answered. Alexander pushed himself up and massaged his head. I came in earlier, but you were fast asleep. I thought I'd give you a chance to get some rest before tomorrow. Alexander stretched out his neck. The earlier events of the day, Like, his reaction, the alcohol, all flooded back to him. Anything left to do? Theo glanced around the empty room. They're still in rehearsals. Alexander nodded and pressed his forehead with the palm of his left hand. We don't have much time, Theo continued. Time for what? Theo hesitated. There's something I have to tell you. You can't back out. I'm not leaving you, Theo reassured him. But in case something happens, if I don't make it... Of course you're going to make it, Alexander interrupted. His stomach sank when he saw Theo's expression. Was he sick too? His eyes darted over the illusionist's body, hunting for signs of disease. I'm not sick, Theo said, reading Alexander's mind. But we have to be realistic. One of us might die. And if it's me, there's something I need you to tell Lena. Something I never told her. Alexander felt what little enthusiasm he had left drain out of him sharply, like the air being released from a punctured balloon. They were almost at the end. Please, it's important. You had the courage to be honest about your past. I owe it to you and to Lena to do the same. Alexander swallowed and cleared his throat. What is it? On the day Lena was born, I made a decision that would change our lives, Theo began. In the dim light, Theo told him the whole story. When he was finished, he wiped a single tear from his eyes. Alexander couldn't speak. What, they're just not going to tell us? He sat dazed and he wondered if he could still trust the person sitting with him. Why didn't you just tell her about Isabella from the start? Theo looked like a little boy who'd just been found out by a teacher or a parent. I didn't think she'd ever find out, but then Horace gave her that letter and... Alexander thought back to when Lena had told him about her father's affair, but he couldn't have imagined this. Alexander? Alexander glanced up and saw the pain in Theo's eyes. He softened and squeezed his hand. It's not your fault. Gia didn't die because of you. he said. Outside in the hall, the chatter of men coming back from the day's chores echoed. There was something he still didn't understand. But why tell her now? The damage has already been done. Because everyone deserves to know the truth, Theo said. I hate that I have this hanging over my head. Lena deserves an explanation. He closed his eyes. Do I have your word? Alexander leaned over and hugged Theo. He knew what Theo meant about being honest, especially with those that you loved. As hard as it had been to tell Lena about his past, when he'd finally done so, it was a huge weight lifted. I promise. But on one condition. If I don't survive, you must pass on a message from me to her. Anything, Theo said, nodding. Tell Lena that I love her. Alexander didn't hesitate when he said it. All right. It's really crappy timing because we still have, oh my gosh, a whole nother chapter that's in this section, but it's a long one. So we got to get going and get started. I know, but at least we know tomorrow morning will be a really exciting time. So just so you all know, tomorrow morning is going to be weird time-wise because tomorrow morning is the sign-up for Run Disney again, and that happens exactly at 7 a.m. So it might be, like, I'm probably going to sign on before 7 like I did last time. Shelly, be strong, be better. So I might sign on early tomorrow and start reading while I'm in the queue. And then when it gets close to my turn in the queue, as long as it's not earlier, I'm good. Dude, I have no willpower. You need to gain some willpower, friend. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's always better to be surprised. That's my opinion, especially with art. And then we'll read after I do the sign up. You know what I mean? So that is what tomorrow will bring. Hopefully I will sign up as successfully as last time and it will be no big deal. I also have to help other people sign up this time, like Jenna and my friend Karen. So it's going to be a little hinky. But anyway, I'll see you all later. Bye, guys.